Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Saul and the witch at Endor, 1 Samuel chapter 28. Now it came about in those days that the Philistines gathered their armed camps for war to fight against Israel. The Philistines are going to come to an epic showdown with Israel. They're not going to do it by marching straight inland as they've done in the past. Instead, they're going to be moving north to the valley of Jezreel, this big, wide open valley that back then and even today is sort of the breadbasket for all of Israel. The rest of verse 1, and Achish said to David, know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, you and your men. Achish is under the mistaken apprehension that David is on his side. David has been living with the Philistines. He was on the run from Saul. And now that this conflict is going to come up, now this war is coming, Achish is planning for David to be with him. Verse 2, David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. So Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. He thinks that he's going to have David as his right-hand man. Verse 3, now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. Now that was repeated. Notice we saw this almost not quite word for word, but back in chapter 25, verse 1, we had read back then that Samuel died and all Israel gathered together and mourned for him and buried him at his house at Ramah. In case you had forgotten, that's repeated now because it's going to be an essential part of the story. So it's a little bit of a flashback. We're going to see quite a few of these coming up. So he was dead, they buried him, but notice the rest of the verse, and Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. Now that word medium, we're going to see that again. Medium is an ab. In this case, it's plural. Those who were abot, they were mediums. The word actually comes from wineskin. You could think of it this way. A wineskin is something that holds the spirits, and these were people that said they held the spirits. I guess that's one way to put it. And also spiritus, that's a different word, that's eudoni. Yad is to know, so he had removed the knowers and the people who were filled with spirits. He had removed them from the land, as he was supposed to do. Verse 4, so the Philistines gathered together and came and camped in Shunem. The Philistines come up now to this area of Shunem in this big wide valley of Jezreel. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they camped in Gilboa. There's a mountain that juts out into that valley, this mountain range of Gilboa. And he camps in Gilboa, and they are camped in Shunem, and they are ready for the battle to take place. Here we are at Mount Gilboa, looking to that area. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. The Urim was something that the high priest, this device that he would use to determine the will of the Lord. But all of that is gone by the wayside. He's not getting any word of God from dreams, from the high priest, by prophets. Heaven is silent, at least insofar as Saul is concerned. Verse 7, then Saul said to a servant, seek for me a woman who is a medium. There's that word again, although this time it's a ba'alat of. That is we could call it a lordess, a governess of the queen, maybe of the spirits or something, that sort of thing. A woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, behold, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. Well, we read now that Saul then disguised himself by putting on other clothes and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. Now to get to Endor, remember we had the Israelites on Mount Gibeon, we had the Philistines by Shunem, so he's going to have to make a detour around the Philistine lines to get to Endor. He makes this midnight run to meet with this woman. Verse 9, but the woman said to him, behold, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? I'm not supposed to be doing this sort of thing. Saul answers, Saul vowed to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, notice he's making an oath and bringing God into this oath. As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. So Saul is, in a sense, taking the punishment upon himself. Verse 11, then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. And then we read in verse 12, and some scholars have issues with this. Verse 12 says, when the woman saw Samuel. Now, this brings up the question, did she really see Samuel? Do seances really work? And what's going on here? There are those that look at this and said, well, she was just putting on a show. Maybe this was a demon or something like that. That once somebody is dead, they can't come back from the dead. And I would say usually that is true. This is not, this is not the sort of thing where Saul did it, so go down and do likewise. No, we're told very explicitly in the scriptures, don't go playing with this sort of thing. Furthermore, I would say it doesn't usually work. In fact, I would say that the woman's intention, now this is just my guess, I'm guessing that the woman was not really planning on it working. I think that she was going to be putting on a show. She would pretend to see something, and she'd, sort of a good pretender, maybe do a little ventriloquism and make it sound like there's a voice. But we read in verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel, and that sounds to me like she really does see Samuel. And notice she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. Not only does she recognize Samuel, she recognizes now who Saul is. Verse 13, the king said to her, do not be afraid, but what do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being. That's the word Elohim. I see a godlike creature, I think, coming up out of the earth. Verse 14, he said to her, what is his form? And she said, an old man is coming up, and here it is, he is wrapped with a robe. That's significant. And Saul hears that, and we read that Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. How did he know it was Samuel? Because of the description, he's wrapped with a robe. This reminds us of what had happened way back in chapter 15, where they had their last meeting, and Samuel said, because I'm not going to go with you. And Samuel turned to go, and Saul seized the edge of his robe, and it tore. And when his robe tore, Samuel said to Saul, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, has given it to your neighbor who is better than you. That was speaking of how the kingdom would be given to David. And now here is that same prophet wrapped with that same robe. And Saul recognizes him. Verse 15, then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I'm greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me. He wants to bring him up to speed. After all, Samuel's been dead. And Saul has departed, God has departed from me, and no longer answers me either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore, I've called you that you may make known to me what I should do. Verse 16, Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you? After all, Samuel has been one who has always listened to God. He's spoken the voice of God. His name means one who hears God. And he says, why are you asking me? If God has left you, why do you think I would be with you? Since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary. Verse 17, the Lord has done accordingly as he spoke through me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. God has done exactly what I said that God would do. Verse 18, as you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so the Lord has done this thing to you to this day. You were disobedient way back then. By the way, you're still being disobedient. Verse 19, moreover, the Lord will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Therefore, tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. In other words, I'm dead and you're going to be dead as well. I don't think it's saying necessarily you're going to be in heaven or anything like that. He's not addressing that. He's just addressing, I'm dead and you're going to be dead tomorrow. Indeed, the Lord will give over the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Verse 20, then Saul immediately fell full length upon the ground and was very afraid because of the words of Samuel. Also, there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day and all night, and this just brings him down. Verse 21, the woman came to Saul and saw that he was terrified and said to him, behold, your maidservant has obeyed you, and I've taken my life in my hand, and I've listened to your words which you spoke to me. So now also please listen to the voice of your maidservant. Let me set a piece of bread before you, that you may eat and have strength when you go on your way. Like, go on your way, but you're going to have to eat something just to get you up and out. Verse 23, but he refused and said, I will not eat. However, his servants together with the woman urged him, and he listened to them, so he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. Verse 24, the woman had a fattened calf in the house, and she quickly slaughtered it, and she took the flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it, as sort of a quick meal, and she brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate, and they arose, and they went away that night. And so our story of this encounter ends. But I'd like to pause and look at that story and juxtapose it with another story. You see, heaven had been silent. It had been silent for Saul, and it reminds us of a time when heaven was again silent. Not that God had gone on vacation, but when we get to the Old Testament, we find a time when the prophets no longer were speaking, and for a long time, in fact, for about 400 years, heaven was silent. Saul in our story had looked for a way to get a word from God, and there were people who were looking throughout those 400 silent years for a way to get a word from God. But finally, a word did come. In Saul's story, she is given the sign of a man wrapped in a robe. And in our story, we have been given a sign as well. Do you remember when the Christ child was born, when Jesus was born, that angels appeared not to prophets, not to priests, but to shepherds, and said to them, this is going to be the sign. You'll see the child wrapped in cloths and laying in a manger. A manger. You see, a manger back then, you're used to seeing pictures of mangers with made of wood. They didn't make mangers of wood back in Bible times or in Bible places. Wood was far too valuable a commodity. Instead, mangers were made of rock. And so imagine this manger, this rock slab with a little child wrapped in cloths. That's a sign of this wrapped body lying on a slab of rock. It's a sign of what he came to accomplish. For Saul, that was a message of judgment. But for us, it is a message of salvation as he took our judgment upon himself. He was born to die in our place, so that as we trust in him, we would not partake in that judgment. We would find that he was judged in our place so that we could have life.